This video was sponsored by Skillshare, but more on that later. When all hope is lost, the forces of the Imperium can still hope that the day will be saved by the arrival of the Legion of the Damned. These fiery Space Marines have long held an interest for me. I've always been drawn in by their mysterious origins and Ghost Rider-like appearance. However, they are sadly no longer available in miniature form unless you want to try luck on eBay or you want to convert some. I'm Pete the Wargamer, and in this video I'll be showing you how to convert the Legion of the Damned. I began with a basic Intercessor. I'm using one of the Assault Intercessors from Indomitus here, but all of the techniques that I'll be demonstrating can easily be applied to your regular primers or even your firstborn Marines. So I started by removing all the components required to build a Marine, before cleaning up any of the mold lines and contact points with my knife. However, I didn't assemble these parts together just yet. The adjustments that I was going to make would be much easier if the parts remained separate. The first modification to make was to the chest. I wanted to remove the crest in order to make the surface much easier to modify later on. If you've seen my conversion guides before, you'll know that I'm a big fan of doing this, as it really opens up the model to have extra parts added or even different markings painted on later. Anyway, I went about removing the crest first with a knife. I very carefully shaved the bulk of the crest away, cutting away small slithers so that I was not applying too much pressure. The more pressure you apply, the more likely you are to cut yourself. Once the bulk had been removed, I switched over to my flat file and used it to smooth out the chest area. I kept the basic structure in place and tried to keep the plate a similar thickness across the whole chest. It seems like a lot of work, but once you get the hang of the technique, you should be able to power through a hold squad relatively quickly. Next, I wanted to start working to build up the bone motif of this Legionnaire, and so I dipped into the ever useful Citadel Skulls kit and removed one of the Jeweler's skulls. I kept the box handy as I was going to be using this later on. As I wanted to glue this skull to the centre of the Legionnaire's chest, I needed to make some adjustments as the skull was currently much too big. So I grabbed my clippers for this task and made a cut just behind the face of the skull, removing a good chunk of the cranium as I made the cut. A lot of people comment on the clippers I use in my videos. These are Red Grass Games precision nippers and they slice through plastic like a hot knife through butter. They are a bit pricey than other brands, but their sharpness is a godsend for work like this. So once the front of the skull had been detached from the back, I needed to smooth out where I made the cut to ensure that I would fit flush against the chest. With these kinds of things, it's important to make small adjustments and test the fit regularly. This allows you to see exactly what cuts you need to make and prevent you from going too far with it. Once I was happy with the fit, I then glued the skull to the centre of the chest, creating the centre point of my calcium-rich iconography. To fill in the space either side of the skull, I opted to use the ulnar and the radius. Yeah, that's right, I know to use Wikipedia. And I took these from some Age of Sigmar skeletons that I had in my bits box. However, if you're looking for a whole bunch of cheap but good quality plastic skeletons, you can't go wrong with 32 skeletons for £25 from Wargames Atlantic. It makes them far cheaper than Games Workshop's equivalent, and so much more cost effective to adorn your models or your battlefields with. So, using my clippers, I then separated the forearm from the upper arm and hand by making cuts at the elbow and the wrist respectively. I then used my knife to clean up the bones and flatten them out a bit at the back. By using parts from the left and right arm, I was able to mirror their placement when I glued them to the torso, which resulted in a dead animal bits recreation of the Imperial Aquila. After allowing the chest motif to dry, I then went about gluing the two halves of the torso together. If you're using a different kit from me, then you can go ahead and assemble your legs and torso together at this point too. Continuing with the bone motif of the Legion of the Damned, I needed a helmet that was based around a skull. The helmets found in the Reaver kit were by far the most obvious solution for this. However, there are alternatives from third-party bits manufacturers such as these resin cranium pattern legionary heads from Cromlech. Attaching the Reaver head required no additional adjustment and fitted nicely into the ball socket, leaving me with a skull helmet that complements the bones on the chest. The final piece of the bone that I added to the model was a trophy skull to the belt. Again, this was taken from the Citadel skull set and again required some trimming to be made to the back of the skull. Attaching the skull without any adjustment would make it appear much too prominent at the waist, so the trims will help to blend it into the rest of the model a little more. Once I had made the desired cuts, I then went about gluing the skull to the belt. Another motif of the Legion of the Damned that I had seen in some pieces of their artwork were chains. This makes sense as it helps to convey the idea that they are bound to their role and also throws back to classic ghosts like Jacob Marley in A Christmas Carol. The chain I decided to apply was this very fine chain that I bought from a railway modelling store, which had 1 by 1.5mm links. However, before I could apply the chain, I needed to first prep the area that it would be attached to. I took the left chain sword arm and began to carefully remove the Indomitus Crusade symbol from it, much like how I removed the symbol from the chest. I started with my knife before smoothing everything out with a rounded file. Once the area had been prepped, I placed a small drop of superglue to the waist and lay one end of the chain into it. I allowed this to dry for a minute or so before starting to wrap the chain around the wrist. When I was happy with the number of wraps, I cut the chain to length with some clippers and, using some more superglue, fixed the second end into place. Whilst the chain had been pulled tight as I had wrapped it, it would likely still move when we came to paint it, so I applied a few small dots of superglue across the chain wrapping and allowed it to flow around the chain, and this allowed it to be fixed into place. I then repeated the gluing, wrapping, cutting and then gluing of the chain, but this time I applied the chain around the thigh instead. Alongside the bones, another absolute classic trait of the Legion of the Damned are their flames, and to represent this I reached into a kit which is another personal favourite source of cool bits. It is of course the Flagellant set. I picked out this particular Flagellant who is, rather unwisely, wearing a flaming brazier atop his skull. To remove this from the rest of the head, I opted to use my saw, as the head was much too thick to easily cut through with a knife or some clippers. Using my hobby saw, I lined it up just below the metal band and carefully cut through the head. With the brazier separated, I then used my knife and file to smooth out the cut to create a flat bottom. Another good source for these fiery components is the Hex Race Kit from Age of Sigmar. They feature similar brazier-laden heads, as well as a bunch of other flaming pieces of equipment. I planned on attaching the brazier to the top of the power pack, but in order to get a good surface in which to glue it to, I needed to bring in my file. I then proceeded to flatten out the area that sat between the two raised bumps. After smoothing out, I was able to bring in my recently removed brazier and glue it into place. You may find that you need to make a few more adjustments to either the brazier or the power pack in order to get this to fit between the raised parts, but once you're happy with the fit, you can bring in your glue and fix it into place. My final step in this conversion was to simply attach a few extra purity seals to the model. Normally I would keep this to around 1 per model for my regular Marines, but as the Legion of the Damned seemed to reside within the Immaterium, it made sense to me that a little extra holy protection wouldn't go amiss. So I gathered a few extra purity seals from various different Space Marine kits and attached these in various locations across the miniature. And with that, the conversion was completed. All that needed to be done now was to base and apply a suitable paint scheme, which left me with this. And here we have the completed Damned Legionnaire. I painted his armour and equipment in muted tones and used blues to create a blackened and scorched effect. This blue then contrasted nicely with the orange and yellows that I used to line the armour panels to create the appearance of heat emanating through it. I also gave him a suitably volcanic looking base to match the theme of the model. Overall, this was great fun to build. It involved a little more cutting and trimming than some of my more recent conversions, which is always a bit of a gamble, but I'm really happy with how this guy came out. Also, with the exception of the brazier, most of the parts are fairly easy to get a hold of en masse, which means you could realistically build this technique into an army without much extra cost. Likewise, while I focus on an Assault Intercessor for the basis of the conversion, it would be fairly simple to apply the same techniques to your other Space Marine units. So, as always, I just want to say a big thank you to all of my Patreon supporters and the folks who use my affiliate links. Your help is always greatly appreciated. If you like this video, then check out my other conversion guides and please do consider subscribing. But before I go, here's a little bit about Skillshare, the sponsors of this video. Skillshare is an online learning platform that offers you a whole bunch, thousands in fact, of classes that cover a vast range of topics, from illustration, design, photography and video to marketing, business analytics and leadership. When I'm not making YouTube videos, I work as a software developer by day, and both myself and my colleagues have found the courses offered in web development to be a great help. The JavaScript Toolkit by Chris Hallman is full of useful tips that are presented in an enjoyable format. It has been invaluable in helping me to brush up on my web development skills and keeping me up to date with the latest practices and technologies. Everything on Skillshare is done at your own pace. There is no pressure to complete classes within a set time frame, there are no ads to interrupt your learning, and there are new classes being launched all the time. It's a great way to make use of that extra free time that a lot of us seem to have acquired recently in a productive way. All of this is available for $10 a month when bought as an annual subscription, but the first 1,000 of you can try Premium for free for 2 months by using my link in the description below. So thanks for sticking around to the end of this video, and until next time, thanks for watching and goodbye.